absence. With Robbie being here, we're going to do a kind of dual combination, but it really fits with this subject because when we're talking about lateness and short-term absences, there's a number of things to focus on, and we really look at this as it can be a bit of carrot and stick. So I'll talk you through some legal options and some the disciplinary procedures and the capability procedures and how we're dealing with these issues. But a lot of the time, there are, in terms of dealing with the issues of absence and lateness, other tools, both technologically and kind of more socially, and either on a centered basis, can be just as useful as the stick. But we'll give you both set of options today. I think it's another one. I think I keep repeating myself in the seminars we're doing at the moment, but it's something we really need to look at in the environment we are in at the moment, which is one that is with obviously very low unemployment, in very difficult market to hire, and therefore we need to look at your absence procedures and your procedures to deal with lateness. And yes, you can follow a very prescriptive process, but is that actually helping you? And I've talked to a few of my clients who have almost felt hamstrung by their own processes in terms of getting people to the ends of capability processes or their Bradford Factor triggers, which will come on to being met, and the actual answer being, well, actually here we don't want to lose this member of staff. Yes, their absence is not ideal, and their level of attendance is not ideal, but if we follow that through, we will have lost a member of staff who will be very difficult to replace. So again, I think the critical one to look at in the environment that we are in today. So quick summary of what we're gonna talk about. So really the starting point to today is the absence itself, and either what we've called a type of absence, or really what's caused the absence to occur, or the poor attendance to occur. And we'll talk through that, because that really leads into the next bullet point, and how you're dealing with this is whether are we dealing here with a conduct or a capability matter. I'm going to try not to make this an unfair dismissal seminar in terms of fair dismissals and processes, but it's important to know that we are really starting people off at the right track. I think one of the most common misconceptions, the most common errors that I see day to day in practice, is that the absence, short-term absence in particular, is dealt with as a conduct issue, when really it needs to be a capability issue. But there are lots of overlaps, and we'll talk through that. Going to then speak, for a few minutes on Bradford Factor. Some of you will be familiar with that. Some of you will say, what the hell does that mean? So we will talk through that, really, which is a trigger level and a measuring tool for attendance. And that's one of the things that Robbie's going to pick up in his demonstration about how that can be used, and a technological solution to use that. We're then going to touch on lateness as something really that is often associated, but really should be dealt with separately to attendance and absence issues, and we'll discuss that. And finally, I'll give some of the kind of solutions, really leading into Robbie's element, which is how do we manage this? How do we manage the attendance, the absence, the lateness? How do we track it? And again, how we can use technology to help us with those issues. So that really is the plan for today. I will hope to get that done in 35-40 minutes. Robbie will then show you the system for probably 10-15 minutes. We can then obviously happy to answer questions either using the chat function, which is available on Teams, or if we've got enough time, I think we've got quite a decent number of you here today, so we potentially could look at asking questions on live if people would like to do that. So we'll have a look at that at the end. So moving on. really the start of this is, as I say, what we call in this slide the type of absence. I should give a shout out here to my colleague Jake, who's joining us today and is letting you all in and producing it. This is also his slide, so Jake's really pushing the boat out today. He's got a picture. He's using his arrows and his word art. So big shout out for Jake. So we've looked at the reason for the absence, and then really two paths we can go down, and the reason for the absence is really critical, because that will, in most cases, govern how we deal with this issue. The critical point to start with is that the reason for the absence is not always apparent on the first day of non-attendance. And this is where the blurring between processes can become important, and that things can result in issues that potentially are conduct and capability issues, because there is a lot of overlap between the two. But that reason is really critical. So obviously I would say the majority of absences people are dealing with on a day-to-day basis will be for sickness and illness, but that always isn't apparent straight away. There can be people who are simply AWOL, and we don't realise that the reason for the absence is a sickness until there is, in some extreme cases, it can go on for weeks or even months, where people are absent without leave, which would really be a conduct issue that we'll talk about. But then we find out the reason is ill health, which will probably then lead you down a capability matter. There can be other reasons for absence. As I say, people can simply go AWOL without any reason at all. There can be reasons to do with time off for dependents, caring responsibilities, where again it's not actually a sickness. So we need to look at, well, whether is this a conduct or capability, or really no process needs to be followed, or a completely different process which doesn't result in any form of warning or what we'll talk about with improvement notices, which is capability. So that reason is really critical. But the learning point, if anything, is to be prepared to modify and change your process depending on that reason changing or something else coming out of the woodwork. We'll talk in a bit about process and the importance of process, but again, whenever I am dealing with absence issues, especially when we're talking about ill health, it's really important not to become so tied to your process that you cannot obviously alter your path and change direction. We talked right at the start about obviously flexibility now in the current market, and yes, we need to guard against issues and allegations of inconsistent treatment, but especially when we're talking about ill health, that ability to adjust and differ our process is critical. So when we've identified the reason for the absence, we will look to go down either one of two paths, really, which is conduct or capability. So conduct really is when we are dealing with a disciplinary matter. So when the absence is probably also being caused by or accompanied by some level of misconduct, so a failure to do something, or because the absence has been caused by another form of misconduct. Capability really is obviously to deal with when the absence is genuine and obviously but is causing problems within the organization. Really, obviously this morning we're focusing on short-term absence. Really that little chart on the slide will have, with the capability, they will then have two other arrows coming from that, which is to deal with a short-term absence case and something which is a long-term absence, because again, there needs to be a slightly difference in the process. There's a case, quite an old established case of Lincott versus cereal packaging, which deals with lots of elements, is one of the lead cases on capability. But why we've raised that today is there's a key provision within that case that talks about that if there is a dismissal linked to short-term absence, there is not a necessity to obtain a medical report if there is a number of short-term unconnected illnesses. And why that is important, because again, that justifies a slightly differing capability process with either a short-term absence and then a long-term absence, which is caused by obviously a medical issue. Well, I think came across and out of that case, unfortunately, there was this blurring between the lines between conduct and capability. Of a number of you in today, and again, this would be easy to do in person, so I won't ask you to put your hand up. I would imagine a number of your organisations still deal with attendance as conduct issues, i.e. as a disciplinary process, where you will result in levels of warnings being given. I'm going to be careful with the word warning, and I'll talk about that in due course, in terms of you can still have warnings in a capability process. Sometimes the name is changed now to kind of help distinguish between the two. But really, there's the established case law in this is short-term absence is a capability, not a conduct issue. So to give some illustration of that, we've just put this, we could have loads of these, but just to distinguish in terms of the absence and the reason for the absence, is this going to be a capability or a conduct really issue and follow a disciplinary process? So the first one obviously is this unauthorized absence, which clearly would be a conduct issue. If someone is for no reason, and that reason is never explained or never properly justified, it doesn't turn up to work when they are supposed to turn up to work, that would be a conduct matter that would result in disciplinary action. As we talked about, key with any of this is that the process may change, because the unauthorized absence may become an authorized absence. Fit notes, notes from medical experts come out of the woodwork later down the line and explain an absence. Obviously, previously, it doesn't always have to be a medical issue. I've dealt with cases where obviously employees have been in police custody, for example, and not been able to justify their absence. So an unauthorized absence can become an authorized absence, but if not, it's a conduct matter and should be dealt with under a disciplinary process. Similarly, second one, failure to follow absence reporting procedure. So this normally is a technical conduct issue again, where they may have explained their absence, but they have not technically followed our reporting procedure. So that's not obviously notifying in time, not doing it through the correct method. So if our business insists through their sickness absence reporting procedure to do a call before 8:30 and we get a text from a relative 2 hours later, obviously that is then a technical breach of that policy, and again it should be a conduct matter. The obvious other one, and which would be a capability, is the final one, which is a high frequency of absence. So this is where obviously the absence reporting procedure has been followed, and that the reporting has been done properly, but just the frequency of the absence and the poor attendance obviously is putting a mass strain on the business. And this is the classic one we're dealing with today, which really should be dealt with as a capability matter. The final complication, and what often happens in these cases, is what you'll actually find is probably all of those 3 bullet points often coming in the same issue. So you'll have an unauthorized absence, a failure to follow a reporting procedure because it's unauthorized, and there's a high frequency of absence. So then that is the classic question: well, what do we do? Do we go down a capability or a conduct process? And that again is a difficult question, and sometimes the answer is both, depending on what level of where we're dealing with here in sanctions, because you could go down a conduct route for the unauthorized, but then we still want to manage this person's attendance. So you may see different levels of warnings or improvement notices dependent on what has happened, because again, whenever we're managing someone's attendance, we are trying to look to the future, and the law is very keen that we obviously go through a process where people's attendance can improve. So we have to go through a series of notices or warnings to that effect. Equally, someone's conduct, we go through a similar process. So again, that route is key, but obviously be aware that you may have to follow more than one route. And I appreciate the difficulty of that. Again, as I said at the start, I'm really conscious not to make this a unfair dismissal seminar, but it's absolutely obviously important that if we are following a proper absence management process, that we don't result in claims in unfair dismissal and unfairly dismiss individuals. So that's obviously what we're here today to avoid. So obviously there is a distinct, and not in all organisations, as I say, because a lot of times short-term absence is dealt with as a disciplinary issue, but there really should be 2 distinct processes, or as I said at the start, probably 3, between a disciplinary process and then that capability, probably distinguishing between a short-term absence and a long-term absence. So some organisations have attendance policies that will deal with the short-term absence, and then a long-term capability process. So you'll find in these in a number of organisations, and whenever we're dealing in discussions with absence and attendance, we're dealing with semantics a lot. And then the next bullet point is absolutely critical illustration of that. There's lots of names to things, and there's lots of things are called capability, attendance, improvements, and you can get lost in processes and which one should I be following. Is it sickness absence? Is it capability? Is it attendance? So again, you need to be aware of what your own policy is, and there's an education process with your staff and your management as to that as well. And my point that you need to be adaptable. So it's, I absolutely understand how this can become a minefield, but the real key is that you should distinguish between a conduct issue, i.e. where there is a disciplinary process and the individual receives a form of warning as a sanction, and the capability process where you are not looking at fault necessarily, but you're looking at someone's pattern of attendance and how that needs to improve, and what steps can be done to help that improve. And that's whenever we're dealing between capability and disciplinary. Capability, there is more onus on the organisation to help and assist improvement. So whether that's a completely separate topic of performance management, or in this case, attendance and short-term absence, there is much more obligation on the organisation to help that improvement. The final point that I've alluded to on a few occasions, that traditionally, and again, there's nothing absolutely wrong with this, that even under a capability process, people would receive warnings based on their attendance, and we'll talk about Bradford Factor, for example, in a minute. And they would have trigger levels, and they would have warnings. What we are seeing more of, and a bit of this is can be criticised as I say, as semantics and calling things something more slightly fluffier, but you are often seeing now for capability issues, the use of improvement notices. So you have a first improvement notice and a final improvement notice, and then a termination. The reason for that, as I say, is twofold. One, it shows that we are trying to obviously seek improvement, and there is an obligation on us to do that. So that's helpful language. The other way, as I say right at the start, is sometimes you'll have two distinct processes here. So to have someone on something like this, they can have therefore have people on first warnings and first improvement notices, and it really helps that it's distinguished, because then let's say we have a further issues of poor attendance or unauthorized absence, you can then pick the correct path that you are already a way down. So that's something to look at in terms of your own processes, what we are calling things in that process. So Bradford Factor, something that I would really straw poll of my 200 plus clients would probably be used by, I would guess, a third to absolutely half at most. What the Bradford Factor is, for people who aren't aware, is it's a measure for really tracking and acting as a trigger level for measuring someone's absence and attendance. It is called the Bradford Factor because I think it was obviously developed at Bradford University, and where the name comes from. As the first point on that slide say, it really should form part of a specific capability process, whether that, as I say, be an attendance policy or a capability process, and you need to obviously absolutely develop the use of the Bradford Factor within the process. What is it? And then I'll talk a bit more how you use it. Really, it's a formula, and the formula again is on the screen. It's S2 times D equals B. So S squared, S being the total number of separate absences by an individual, D is the total number of days of absence of that individual, and B is the Bradford Factor score. So again, Jake's just put two examples for you. So if there's one absence and one instance of 7 days off, so it's one separate absence totaling 7 days, it's 1 times 7, your Bradford Factor score is 7. If we then have two separate instances, but again, a total of 7 days off, you'll obviously see that how that impacts on the Bradford Factor score. So it's 2 times 2 times 7, giving you 28. What the Bradford Factor is designed to do is to really act as a detriment for short-term frequent absence. So there is a penalty in the formula for these individuals who have a number of frequent absence. So a day here, a day there, a Monday off or a Tuesday off after every bank holiday type absence, in comparison to one person who has one absence that happens to be a bit lengthy, but is a genuine absence, which has resulted in a number of days off. So that is the purpose of the tool. What sits behind the Bradford Factor and the Bradford Factor score B is a number of trigger levels. These trigger levels don't have to be uniform throughout the country. Each organisation sets their own trigger level. So whether that be a score of 50, 75, 100, and that will result in again, in my terminology, a capability process being triggered, and then a level of improvement notice being set, so to obviously stop that score going up, or indeed going under that figure. I should have said at the start that, again, it can change, but generally the Bradford Factor is measured over a year, over a 12-month period, and then absences obviously can fall off. So it is a rolling figure rather than an absolute. So you can obviously have what we want to be seeing when improvement notices are being used as a Bradford Factor score dipping, but there is obviously scope that every time it hits that trigger level, a separate process is followed. Just to give you again some quick advantages and disadvantages of using the Bradford Factor, and why some organisations love it and some don't and have shied away of it. The clear advantage is it provides a consistent approach how absence and attendance is measured and importantly acted upon. So we're not having inconsistency where one individual in one department has terrible attendance but isn't managed, while someone in another department, as soon as they hit a trigger is managed, and Robbie will show you shortly again how that can appear and how you can track that. So consistency is an absolute the key. Obviously key other element is this is kind of an objective tool, and this can be both an advantage and a disadvantage. That the formula is the same for every individual. So we can say, well, we're not treating you differently. This is your score, and we are dealing with you just the same as any other individual. I'll talk about in the disadvantages why you sometimes need to that can hold you to things. But essentially, this helps in arguments that people are saying, well, I'm being discriminated against, or I'm being treated differently. Well, no, you're not. You're being treated exactly the same as the other individuals, and this is how we are doing it consistently. Again, I'll talk about what we need to change from that. Again, the use of a tracking system that individuals are aware of. The advantage really is this encourages employees' attendance to improve because they can be aware of their score. And there are organisations where people are aware of their score, and if they have another occurrence, it ticks them to a trigger. So it can encourage obviously that person to be aware that they can't have another day off here just because they've a big night the night before, for example. So again, advantage to that. Obviously the disadvantage in the cons, the reverse of that, where that kind of consistency can be a major disadvantage. So obviously what we're generally talking about here is disability discrimination. So often when we are dealing with either absence, it can be caused often by ill health, and that ill health can often be caused by a disability. Whenever we are dealing with someone with a disability, one of the things we need to consider is reasonable adjustments. One of the key reasonable adjustments that you need to look at when you have someone with a disability is the Bradford Factor, if that is something that you adopt, because you will need to potentially look at either discounting areas of specific absences if they are linked to that disability, or perhaps you look at the trigger levels and adjusting those for people whose disability will naturally cause them to have more time off. Robbie will show you a really useful tool within Evaluate in terms of discounting absences and how you can do that really easily. So that is the major disadvantage, and if you just plow on for consistency's sake, you can get yourself into a bit of trouble. Moving on then in terms of today, and we'll talk about lateness. Again, I am absolutely aware that often individuals who are late often have poor attendance and high frequency of absence. But again, generally, this is something that should be dealt with distinctly from the absence. But I'm, as I say, absolutely conscious that they sometimes can go hand in hand, and you again may be following a dual process. So the first question on the bullet point is conduct or capability. My view, in most cases, lateness should be a conduct issue. Again, we're going to same thing that we started out with. Absence reason is important. But really, lateness should be a conduct issue. So we're dealing it with the same way that we're dealing with an unauthorized absence or a failure to follow a process, and going down a conduct issue. As I say, the second bullet point, is it distinct? Well, sometimes it is, yes, but other times it can be separate. So you'll often be picking. And well, should we again deal with the absence or the lateness, or as a kind of combined approach? As I say, the difficulty there is you need to weigh up. You need to weigh up resource. You need to weigh up your time, and you will have to weigh up some form of likelihood of this reoccurring. And really to look at, well, what is the key issue? Obviously, if there is a lateness and an unauthorized absence in a disciplinary process, you'll deal with both of those issues, and they will form part of the consideration of someone's misconduct, in that we are looking at both elements, but again, important to look at. Again, just as we were talking with Bradford Factor, third point on the slides, discrimination. We should never be too far away from our thoughts when we are dealing with persistent lateness. So this isn't to say, oh, the bus is late, the train is late. Again, often isn't linked to someone's any elements of discrimination, but this is the two classic ones really are, again, disability, where there is a health issue that causes a lateness to occur. So common ones I've dealt with are obviously people with conditions such as IBS, which often sometimes means that lateness is unavoidable. Because of hygiene issues. So there's those kind of disability elements that we absolutely need to be aware of and potentially consider when we are looking at either a conduct issue. Is this really a misconduct if there is a legitimate reason? And are we therefore opening ourselves up to discrimination? Other common one you get is, again, sex discrimination arguments. Percentage-wise, female members of staff still have more childcare responsibilities than male members of staff. Therefore, if we are penalising a female member of staff for lateness, which is caused by childcare issues, drop-offs, for example, are we opening ourselves up to some sort of indirect or direct discrimination claim if we sanction that individual linked to that? Again, potential issues there that can arise. So again, a really huge topic, discrimination, that we've talked about under a number of our recent seminars. But again, lateness, always be aware. Final thing to note, something quite technical that we call penalty clauses. Again, this will be useful for Robbie to show you. We're going to talk about tracking attendances and clocking in and clocking out and how that impacts pay. But a penalty clause, just to explain in a bit more detail, is a clause often in someone's contract that will seek to penalise someone who is often, in this case, late. So this will be a clause that, for example, says that if you are late by a set amount, we will deduct a set amount, a fixed amount from your wage. And if it is drafted as such, that would amount to a penalty clause. So the example, if an employee is hourly paid, that's fine, and they're late, you can deduct. But if you have a flat rate, for example, for a salaried employee that says if you are late by up to 15 minutes, we will take a set amount. So some people don't have an equivalent in their contracts that say 15 minutes, it's not equal to the precise time. It's 15 minutes is 100 quid, 30 minutes is £300, and those fixed penalties is what we would call a penalty clause. If you have penalty clauses in your contract of employment, that clause is unenforceable. And if it was to be challenged, that clause within the contract, you wouldn't be able to rely on. So what we are obviously looking at, really, if you are looking for lateness, and Robbie will show you, really is to be able to track clocking in when people clock in, and that their pay reflects the time that they have worked, rather than it being a fixed amount. Obviously, with hourly paid workers, this is a lot easier than people who are salaried, and that's generally where there's problems caused by penalties being applied to lateness. Final thing for me is really to talk, hopefully, about some solutions and some suggestions really on how this can be managed. This will nicely lead into obviously what Robbie is going to talk about, but I think I will obviously lead into this section by really reminding you what we talked about at the start, which is look at the current environment we are in, and look at the issues we've talked about with discrimination and the issues with hiring, and there really is a contrast sometimes in how you have to deal with things with those measures, because what the law wants you to do with absence is follow processes, is to track things, to have all the tools to measure, and that's what we're going to talk about with Robbie. But it also wants you to then, when appropriate, divert from those processes and to make adjustments to those processes, or your Bradford Factor scores. So just in terms of looking at, without having that as a prelude to this, looking at some solutions. So, absolutely key with any absence is to know, actually, to have the facts. To have the facts of when, when we talk about lateness, when people did attend. So rather than, oh, do you remember when John turned up yesterday? Was it 9:05, or was it 9:20, or was it 9:30? Well, again, if you have lateness issues, should you be looking at a clocking in and clocking out system? It doesn't have to be connected to payroll. Robbie will talk you through how it can be, but it doesn't have to be. It can be simply used to measure lateness. So that, the most sophisticated now, is doing that through a QR code. And again, Robbie will show you that shortly in terms of how that can be managed. It can be paper-based. You can write down just to track sign-in sheets to see when people are attending, and really using that as a tool. Again, if you don't have any absence reporting procedures, I suggest that you need some, and again, how other policies and all those policies should link. So I've talked about, you can get lost in policy, but it would really be helpful to have a capability process that is distinct from a attendance or a sickness absence reporting, or a disciplinary process, and making sure that those policies are distinct but talk to each other. So again, anyone who wants us to review their absence reporting, their processes, their policies, absolutely key. I've added one in very late this morning to this slide, which is the next one, which is sick pay. I will really try to avoid being political here, but all stats will show you generally the higher and the more generous your sick pay offering is, the higher levels of attendance of absence that you will see. So again, absences in a lot of local authority jobs where there is very generous sick pay is a lot higher proportionally than a private sector job, clearly connected to pay. Please don't take this as Sam says never pay sick pay, and for me, in any way, trying to suggest that full pay or pay isn't a good thing, but there is often a correlation, and if you are having really serious absence issues, you may need to look at your pay structures and what you are doing in terms of that. We talked about carrot and stick. So fourth, benefits incentives. So a lot of today has been about how do you manage that individual out, or how do you really use sanctions to be able to see an improvement in absence management. If I'm being entirely honest, I would say sanctions rarely achieve improved attendance. There is a number of, it often comes down to culture, why there is high level of absence, either the job that person is doing, or often do they feel rewarded to do it. That's either financially or often the culture of the organisation, and they're being praised for their level of attendance. So often, if you've got an absence problem, rather than looking at the stick, well, can we look at it another way? Can we have reward for 100% attentions? Can we have bonuses that are paid to people who have a high level of attendance? Can we reward people through various methods, either financially or through awards or other incentives that can be used to say, well, no, actually your attendance is critical to the future of this business, and therefore we're going to reward you to do that. Often, as I say, in personal experience, I find that will often drive up your level of attendance. Does it do it on a short-term basis? Perhaps, but it's often a really critical one. Bradford Factor, I'm not going to labour on. We talked about it in detail, but again, efficient trigger systems can obviously help managing it. Final point, obviously, critically be flexible. And I think that's what I've said throughout today, which is there are scenarios which will mean you cannot be consistent, and you have to divert through your policies, either generally connected to potential discrimination arguments or otherwise the financial scenario we're in the economy. As I said right to start with, yes, someone's reached a Bradford Factor trigger level that will mean we can dismiss, but do we want to? Because is there anyone better to replace? So are we dismissing people for the sake of that? Again, flexibility in how the culture works is also key. If someone has a problem with lateness and is constantly getting in late, either because of transport issues or otherwise, or just personally how they are, can you adjust your times? Can you make them start late, obviously start later and finish later? Have a bit more flexibility. Obviously, the huge obviously hybrid working has had a big impact on that. Again, we can still manage that through technology that Robbie will show you, but hybrid working has had a massive impact on absence and lateness. Absence, obviously, for hybrid workers is a fraction of that when you're asking people to commute. So that really is me for today, and it was hopefully to give you a bit of an overview of the issues and critically the tools that we can follow. So I'm just going to pop and stop sharing my screen, and I will now, if he is still around, pass you over to Robbie to quickly show you what we think is some good solutions to deal with this.
Thank you, Sam. Hello again, everybody. So I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully this will. There we go. So hopefully you can see my screen here. So I'm going to log in to Evaluate, Evaluate is a tool created by human resources professionals to manage employees, and it covers not only HR but health and safety, training, performance, and time and attendance. So there's some compliance tools and some various other company tools as well. So I'm going to focus on the absence management areas, and then the different ways in which you can record time, so clocking in and out, etc. So first of all, I want to go to my employee list. So if somebody was to contact me and inform me as their manager that they're off sick, they're not going to come in, or I was aware that they're late, then I can go to my employee list, and this will display everybody that I'm entitled to see according to my role. So if I'm an administrator, I can see everybody, for example. If I'm a manager, just the people that report to me. And I can search for people by role, department, site, or team. I can include people who have left the organisation in the search as well. So if I'm looking for information retrospectively, I just need to tick this box and they'll be included in my search down here. So once somebody's contacted me to inform me that they're not going to attend work, I can click on their name and it will open up their personnel file. And within the personnel file, we have a sickness tab and a lateness tab. So to record a sickness, go to the sickness tab, and you'll see up here a summary, which, because of the Bradford factor, will work on the last 12 months rolling in terms of the time frame that's displayed down here. So with the Bradford factor scoring, it can repair itself over time. So if somebody's had a bad period of attendance, it will, as I say, repair itself. You can actually turn the Bradford factor off if you want to, and you can control the scoring thresholds. So the score is displayed here, and if you hover over the little asterisks, it will tell the manager if there's any action required based on the current score. Over here is a little table that will show the manager if a pattern's emerging. So if there's somebody who takes a day off more commonly than they would another day, for example, in this case, a Monday, it's highlighted in red. And then at the bottom here, we have a log which shows you the 12 months, the current 12 months, but you can also look at previous years and future years. So to record a sickness entry, you click on the green button, and then you choose the reason from the drop down here. Everything in this drop down can be customized. Then you choose the period. So is it a full day or a half day or a custom period? Maybe they came in for an hour and then went home, or maybe they went home a couple of hours early. And then you can put the date range in. So if you're unaware as to when they're going to return from sickness, you can just leave that as today's date. And then if you click on the view button there, it will pop this dialog box up again for you to edit the entry. And then, as Sam mentioned, there are some prompts. So for each sickness occurrence, you can state whether it was related to a known condition, whether you want it to affect the Bradford factor. Now, in the settings area, certain things can automatically be turned off. So dependent related, for example, COVID-19, for example, you might have a policy where they shouldn't contribute towards the Bradford factor. So by default, that would be turned off. You can then state whether a return to work meeting has been actioned, and you can conduct return to works meetings through this system. You can state whether a fit note is on file or any other medical certification, and then you can put in a really detailed note. This box will expand, so you can put as much detail in as you possibly can. And then anything that you want to associate this, maybe you've got a fit note or a medical letter, or even screenshots if they've texted you to say they're not coming in. You can upload all of those as well. So it's all associated with the sickness, and then we can report on those things, which I'll show you in a moment. Lateness works in a similar fashion. At the top, we have a summary. This will tell you how much time has been lost to lateness, and again, whether a pattern is emerging. And then at the bottom, we've got a log that tells you all of the various lateness occurrences. To add an entry, click on the green button, pop the reason in here and the date. Okay, and then in our report section, in the leave and absence tab, we have a Bradford factor league table where you can see who's so far had an absence within the organisation. So in order to appear on this list, they need to have had at least one instance of absence. And then it also displays the Bradford Factor scoring threshold system down here, which you can customize in the settings area. So you can edit your thresholds in accordance to your own policy, and then it will tell you what action, if any, should be considered, and how that calculation was derived. One of the more popular reports is the sickness report. So in here, you can put a date range in. So if I wanted to look at the last couple of years sickness within my organization, I just put the date range in, and there it all is. I can click through to a person's personnel file by just clicking on their name. I can conduct some analysis by looking at the various graphs that are associated with this, but I could also start to drill down if I wanted to. So if I wanted to see who was off sick with for a particular reason, so let's say who was off with COVID, then I can select that, and it just filters the report accordingly. Or if I just wanted to look at a particular employee or a department or a team, then I can just use the filters. So if I had concern over somebody's absence and I wanted to meet with them to discuss it, I could include this in the letter inviting them to a meeting, or bring it along to the meeting to discuss with them. With regards to the system, it is very comprehensive in terms of reports. On our dashboard, it has widgets that show you who's off today, so there's information at your fingertips. Rather than going to find information, however, you can create what we call workflows, and workflows can be created for a number of things, to send a prompt to those that need it, so you don't have to go and seek information. So if I wanted to create a workflow for sickness, for example, I can simply add it here, and then I'd choose the sickness from my various list of things that I can create workflows for. Once I've saved that, I can set some conditions. So any sickness that's been added, updated, deleted, or any change. And then who's going to trigger this? So maybe everybody, or certain roles, departments, teams, or employees. And then who do I want to be notified? So maybe the line manager, or somebody with HR responsibility, for example. And then you'll get an email notification to inform you when there's been any kind of change to sickness or lateness. So I'm now going to touch on the clocking in and out functionality. So whilst Evaluate can work with some existing clocking in machines, we provide everything you need within the system to be able to clock in and out. And there's ways in which you can do it using a mobile phone. But if you don't want people to use their mobile phones, you can use a computer. If they don't have access to a computer, we have means of which you can clock in via a tablet. So you just simply mount a tablet to the wall. So if I go into one of my employees, there are 3 ways of recording time against a tablet that's mounted to the wall. So the first way is to look at these ID badges. So each employee has an ID badge, and within that is a QR code, and you simply download the app for the tablet, and you can scan that QR code, and that will clock the employee in. Scan it again, and it will clock them out. The alternatives to this using the tablet are a code, a PIN code, or facial recognition, which is a brand new feature that we've launched last week. So the employee would approach the screen, it would recognize their face, and then they'd click a button to confirm that they want to clock in. On the mobile phones, it kind of works in reverse. You can have a QR code for each site or department, and then you can just print out that QR code and laminate it, perhaps put it somewhere that's accessible, and then the employees can either use their phone to scan a QR code to clock in and out, or they can simply use a button on the phone to clock in and out. You can control exactly how, where, and when employees clock in and out in relation to their shift, so they don't clock in early or they can't clock in late. You can get notified if they do clock in early or late, and you allow them to do so. You can also round up their clocking in and out entries. And what happens is, once somebody has clocked in or out in our report section, there are a whole bunch of reports around time and attendance, including a roll call report, which is a useful health and safety tool. This will give you a list of who's in now, and you can make sure they're accounted for in the event of a fire drill. But one of the popular ones is the timesheet that is automatically produced. So if I just go back to where I've got a bit of data to show you what this looks like. Okay, so there we go. So you'll have a green entry for clocking in, a red entry for clocking out. If they clock in and out multiple times in a day, you'll have multiple clocking in and out entries. And it displays the time that they've spent clocked in down here. If they're on holiday, there'll be an airplane icon. If they're off sick, there'll be a medical bag icon. And if they're not scheduled to work on a particular day, there will be a icon that looks like this that tells you that they're not due in that day. There's a little summary of overtime or overtime displayed here as well. If you hover over the entry, it gives you information about how they clocked in. So what device, what site, what browser was used. If you allow people to use their phones and you don't have any restrictions on where they can clock in, you can actually see on a map where they've clocked in from. So this is useful if you have people that are out on the road, but it also provides a safeguard against people clocking in from somewhere other than your premises, which again, there are other ways in which you can control that. You can click into the clocking in and out occurrence and edit it. And it'll also link to payroll if you want to. So one of the options on the payroll report is to include time logged hours, and that would also include overtime, and that can be synchronized with your payroll software or sent on to your payroll representatives. And yeah, that's the logging of absence, lateness, and just touching upon the clocking in and out facilities. We are available to give a full demonstration of the entire system, of course, if that's something that is of interest. Chadwick Lawrence will have access to your area, so they'll be able to upload documents. And yeah, it'd be good to go through that if that's of interest.
Perfect. Thanks, Robbie. And just to really echo those last comments, I appreciate one because I waffled for a while. That's really been a tiny amount of the system that Robbie has showed you. What we really wanted to achieve today was to show the benefit of using technology when dealing with these absence and lateness issues. There are, the information is key in these, and that having that, using the Evaluate system is a way that we can, obviously you can use technology to your advantage, and it will help the management. Paper-based, dealing with absence on a paper-based system is incredibly difficult. Whenever you're as soon as your organization gets over 10-15 employees, to track absence is very difficult, and to have reporting tools is a really helpful means of dealing with that. I'm conscious of time, and I think I've reached an hour now. We do have two questions that are in the chat box. I'll deal with them really quickly because they're both really good and helpful questions, and I hopefully won't take too much time to overrun. So thanks to obviously Penny, who asked, for anyone who's not seeing the chat, would parental leave or absence to care for dependents be something that's considered as a disadvantage to the Bradford Factor? There's potential discrimination falling under sex discrimination, for example. The short answer, Penny, is yes, absolutely. What I would be suggesting is what Robbie has just showed you, that when you are logging that reason for the absence, and it is for the care, that should be discounted from Bradford Factor. So Robbie's just shown you in Evaluate how easy it is to do, that you would just uncheck that you would check that box that should be discounted, and that will get you round any issues. But if you don't have that technological solution. You have to do that manually when you're doing your calculations into your Bradford Factor formula. So yeah, really good question. Finally, Hannah has asked, is there a reward for 100% attendance not discriminatory against those who have had a disability and therefore potentially higher absence levels? Again, brilliant question, and the answer is yeah, potentially. We are now in the world, the quite complex world of indirect discrimination, where we have a provision and a policy that can be indirectly discriminatory against someone else. I think what's important to note from Hannah's question is that doesn't mean I'm now saying, well, don't do it. Again, the way round it is to potentially make adjustments based on that person's disability. So if absences, which again evaluates really easy way of doing it, the first check that Robbie showed is this connected to a common issue in absence. So if we know someone has a disability, the attendance is for that reason, that can again be discounted, and your attendance bonus, for example, can be based on unconnected absences. And so again, the more you have, the more information, the easier that to track, the less likely you are to get yourself into discrimination issues. And you can show that, and you'll have the evidence to back up what you are doing. But two really great and helpful questions. Conscious I've overrun, I just want to do some final really big thank yous for me. Mainly to obviously Robbie from Evaluate, who's obviously come and shown you the system. We've partnered with Robbie and Evaluate. Evaluate, by the way, is a system that Chadwick Lawrence use, and it's absolutely fantastic. So we are a partner organisation. To echo Robbie's comments, if anyone would like us to demonstrate that system in more detail, we will be more than happy to do so. We'll put some time aside to either come out and see you, or we can do this obviously through Teams or Zoom, and really go into more detail about the system. It will mean a lot more to you when you see the whole system and you see how employees are added to the system and that whole reporting function. So I would encourage anyone to do that. Please contact myself and I'll arrange that, but Robbie and I will follow up this seminar in general. So again, anyone who's interested, please let us know. Thank you on my end, obviously, to Jake, who's done all the hard work and did all the presentation today and has let you all in. As I said, as I started, this is my last webinar for this program. What our plans are is that Jake and I and the team will be getting together in the next few weeks, months. We generally have a break July to, obviously we end in June, and we have a July and August off generally because of holidays and availability. So we will look to set up our September program, and we'll let you know of that pretty soon. As always, any suggestion for events, anything you'd like us to show you on Evaluate, for example, we'd be more than happy to demonstrate. So drop me an email. The Monday morning dispatch that a lot of you get will continue, and so will our videos and uploading them to YouTube. So there's lots of Chadwick Lawrence content still going to be available, but we'll have a short break for webinar. So final thank you for you all for attending. It's been a really helpful and I think interesting session. So your contributions are always valued. So thank you for attending. I might see a few of you next week at the mock trial. If not, have a lovely summer break for anyone who can get away and not get their flights cancelled. And I will see you at a webinar in September, hopefully. Thanks for your time.